The snow came sideways that morning, driven hard by the wind thick as smoke off a gun barrel. Sarah Parker pulled her worn military jacket tighter, squinting through the white blur. The wagon creaked beneath her, its axles stiff from cold. The horse stumbled, once snorted, and kept on. It had been 2 days since she'd seen another soul on the trail, just snow sky and the endless moan of the plains. In the bow, her son Jason slept beneath a patched blanket, his breath fogging in the frozen air. He was 9 too young to have that look of doubt when she spoke of their future. The cold had crept into everything, their clothes, the wooden wagon slats, her bones. Colorado winters showed no mercy, especially to those with nowhere to call home. Jason stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Are we there yet, Mom? You promised we'd find a real home this time." His voice carried the weariness of a child who'd heard too many promises. Sarah's chest tightened. $230 in her pocket, a nursing job that might not wait, and a son who deserved better than broken dreams. The divorce had left them with nothing but each other and the crushing weight of starting over. Her ex-husband, the respected Dr. Parker, had made sure of that. His affair with the hospital administrator had somehow become Sarah's fault in the courtroom. The wagon's right wheel cracked against a hidden rock, the sound cutting through the wind like a gunshot. The horse reared nostrils, flaring white steam eyes rolling in panic. The wagon lurched sideways, tilting precariously before slamming into a snowdrift. The wheel had split clean through wooden spokes, splintered beyond repair. Sarah sat frozen, heart pounding, staring into the white void. There was no road anymore, no direction, just the world swallowing itself in snow. The temperature was dropping. Night would come early. Without shelter, they wouldn't survive till morning. Jason scrambled forward, clutching her arm. "Mom, look! I see a house." His mittened hand pointed through the flurry toward a shape against the hillside, gray and angular, half buried in drifts. Through the swirling white, Sarah made out the silhouette, a 2-story structure with a wide porch, its boards warped by years of mountain winters. The windows were dark, the chimney choked with ice, but it stood tall, proud, even in ruin. They abandoned the wagon where it sank, securing the horse as best they could. Sarah lifted their single trunk of belongings, everything they had left, and they trudged uphill. The snow reached Sarah's knees, biting through her jeans. Jason struggled behind her, determination on his young face as he fought through each step. The closer they came, the clearer it grew, a Victorian-style house that must have once been grand. Weather-beaten clapboard siding had faded to the color of old bones. A broken weather vane hung sideways from the roof peak, spinning erratically in the gusts. The door gave when Sarah pushed, stiff but not locked. Inside was silence with weight to it. The air smelled of wood rot, dust, and faintly of smoke, long gone. Pools of snow had formed where it had blown through broken windows. A cast-iron stove sat in the corner, black with soot. A single chair lay overturned beside it. Jason clung to her coat. "Is anyone here?" Sarah listened, hearing only the wind answering, whistling through the rafters. "Not anymore, but we can be for now." She closed the door behind them, sealing out most of the storm. Her fingers ached from cold as she surveyed their temporary sanctuary. The stove was old iron, the kind made back east, heavy, stubborn, reliable. She'd learned about these during her military training. The Army had taught her more than battlefield medicine. Survival skills had been drilled into her brain. Sarah knelt, opened the stove's belly, and found old ashes clinging like ghosts to the sides. "We need to get warm, Jason. Help me find anything dry enough to burn." Together they scavenged broken chair legs, fragments of a shelf, scraps of what might have been a wooden crate. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency, clearing the flue, checking for blockages. Her father had heated their Montana home with wood all through her childhood. Some knowledge lived in the muscles, not the mind. She had only 3 matches left in her waterproof case. The first sputtered and died against the cold metal. The second flared weakly but caught the edge of a scrap of paper. Sarah hunched over it, protecting the fragile flame with her body, feeding it splinters and whispered encouragement. The third match wouldn't be needed, not today. The fire spread slow, then steady. The stove remembered its purpose. Jason crouched beside her, eyes wide with relief as the first waves of heat pushed back against the cold. "It's working, Mom. You fixed it." Sarah smiled, a small victory in a war of attrition. "We just needed to remind it what it was made for." Her gaze swept the room, assessing their situation with military precision. They had shelter, they had heat, they needed water, food, and to secure the perimeter habits from her service years that had never quite left her. By nightfall, the main room had warmed enough that their breath no longer ghosted in the air. They ate the last of their jerky and drank melted snow warmed on the stove. Outside, the wind screamed down the valley, shaking the shutters. Inside, the sound softened to a rhythmic hum, almost like the house was singing under its breath. When Jason fell asleep, curled on a dusty bearskin rug they'd found in a trunk, Sarah took the oil lamp and explored. The ground floor held what had once been a parlor, a dining room with a massive oak table, and a kitchen with an old pump handle at the sink. She tried it, not expecting anything, but after several creaking pushes, water gurgled up, shockingly cold but clear. The oak floorboards were warped but solid underfoot. Wallpaper peeled in curling strips from the walls, faded floral patterns like memories reluctant to leave. A bookshelf stood in what must have been a study, a few rotting volumes still in place, their pages fused together with damp. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms. In the largest, a 4-poster bed remained, its mattress long since claimed by mice in decay. The room that must have been a child's still held a small wooden dresser. On top sat a hand-carved toy horse, one leg missing. Sarah turned it in her hands, then set it back carefully as if afraid to wake something. The house hadn't been abandoned long, 20 years, maybe 30 at most. Someone had lived here, loved here, left in a hurry. Why, the question followed her back downstairs, where she checked the fire one last time before lying down beside Jason. Morning arrived with muted light filtering through frost-covered windows. The storm had passed, leaving a world transformed, blindingly white and silent. Sarah stepped onto the porch, assessing their situation. Their wagon lay half-buried 100 yards down the hill. The horse had found shelter beneath a stand of pines, still tethered where they'd left it. She trudged through knee-deep snow to check on the animal, bringing water in a pot from the house. As she turned back toward their shelter, she saw it properly. For the first time, a 2-story farmhouse with Victorian touches, the kind built by someone with dreams. Despite its disrepair, the proportions were pleasing, the craftsmanship evident even in decay. A glimpse of movement in the distance caught her attention, a dark speck moving along what must be a road nearly invisible under snow. She watched tense as it approached, a rider on horseback moving deliberately toward the property. Sarah hurried inside, retrieving the hunting knife from her pack, the only weapon they had. "Jason, stay inside. Someone's coming." The rider dismounted at what remained of a gate at the property's edge. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a silver beard and a hat rimmed with frost. He paused, studying the smoke rising from the chimney with evident surprise, then approached the house with measured steps. Sarah stood in the doorway, knife concealed against her leg, as the stranger removed his hat. His face was weathered, etched with lines, but his blue eyes were sharp, intelligent. He cleared his throat. "Didn't reckon I'd ever see smoke from this place again." His voice carried low and calm. "You folks move in." Sarah kept her stance neutral but ready. "Just passing through. Our wagon broke down in the storm." The man nodded slowly, taking in the situation. This here was the Harrison place. William Harrison built it for his wife Margaret back in '87. Folks used to call it the cold house after William froze one winter when the stove failed him. Been empty ever since. Sarah glanced back toward the warmth inside. "It's warm now." The man's eyes crinkled slightly. "Reckon that's something worth seeing." He extended a gloved hand. "Thomas Harmon. I drive the mail run out of Mill Creek. If you need anything wood salt, lamp oil, you leave word at the post house. I ride this way every 4 days." Sarah introduced herself and Jason, who had appeared behind her. Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out a small brass key. "Found this in the depot safe years ago. Used to open that barn door yonder. Figure it belongs here." He handed it to Sarah, who took it with surprise, noticing the kindness in his eyes. Thomas helped them retrieve their trunk from the wagon and shared his coffee and biscuits. As they sat by the stove, he explained their location 5 miles from Mill Creek, the nearest town. The Harrison property had stood vacant for nearly 23 years since old William had died alone in the winter of '96. "What happened to his wife?" Jason asked, warming his hands around the tin coffee mug. Thomas's eyes grew distant. "Lost in a blizzard. William was hunting when it hit. By the time he got back, Margaret had gone looking for him and never found her till the thaw." He cleared his throat. "William was never right after. Stayed here alone, talking to the house like Margaret was still inside." Before leaving, Thomas walked the perimeter of the house, with Sarah pointing out weaknesses in the structure, places where the elements had done the most damage. The barn still stood, its roof partially collapsed, but with one corner intact enough to shelter their horse. As Thomas mounted to leave, he paused. Word of warning, there's been signs of folks using this place when weather turns. Not the friendly sort. Might want to secure those doors come nightfall. His eyes flicked to a downstairs window, its frame splintered from forced entry. After he'd gone, Sarah investigated further. The broken window had indeed been forced recently. Inside that room, she found empty liquor bottles, cigarette butts, and crude messages scratched into the wall. One stood out, carved deeper than the others: "Read property." That night, after reinforcing the doors with furniture and boarding the broken window as best she could, Sarah explored more thoroughly by lamplight. The kitchen cabinets yielded a few preserved goods, ancient but still sealed. A pantry held tools, rusty but usable hammer saw nails. In what must have been William's study, dust-covered ledgers chronicled the running of what had once been a working cattle ranch. The last entry, dated November 18, was a single line: "No sign of her yet. Snow too deep. We'll try Northridge tomorrow." As Sarah closed the ledger, a floorboard creaked beneath her foot, different from the others, hollow-sounding. She knelt, examining it by lamplight. The board was shorter than those surrounding it, its edges cleaner. Using a kitchen knife, she pried it up, revealing a space beneath. A metal box lay nestled in the cavity, a Winchester ammunition case still solid despite the years. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, she found a Winchester Model 1894 rifle in remarkable condition, gleaming with gun oil, as if it had been maintained until recently. Beside it, several boxes of ammunition still viable. Underneath the rifle lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. Sarah opened it carefully, finding it filled with a man's deliberate handwriting. The first entry was dated January 1894, 2 years before William's death. It began: "My dearest Margaret, the snow has set in early this year. The cattle are thin, the fields asleep. Yet I still feel you here in the walls, in the silence between heartbeats." Page after page revealed William's letters to his dead wife, chronicling his life without her, his refusal to leave the house they had built together. The final pages contained a letter dated just days before his own death. "I keep the fire burning, Margaret, through every night. If ever it goes cold, I pray someone will remember the warmth we built here. This house was made from love. It will not die unless forgotten." Sarah closed the journal, her throat tight. She replaced everything except the rifle, which she checked and loaded with practiced hands. The military had taught her to shoot a skill she'd hoped never to need again. But alone with Jason miles from help, she wouldn't hesitate to protect them both. The next morning brought clearer skies. Using tools from the pantry, Sarah assessed the wagon's damage. The wheel was beyond her ability to fix without a proper workshop. They were stranded, at least until the snow melted enough to walk to town. The house would be their shelter for weeks, maybe longer. Jason took to exploring his natural resilience, showing as he claimed the smallest bedroom as his room. He cleared away debris, arranged their meager belongings, and even found a chest of children's clothing in better condition than his own worn garments. Sarah focused on making the house secure and habitable. She cleared broken glass from windows, hanging blankets to block the drafts. The stove became her ally, its consistent heat a victory against the brutal cold. The pump in the kitchen, once properly primed, provided water that, while requiring boiling, saved them from melting snow. On the second day, while checking the roof from inside the attic, Sarah discovered a serious structural weakness, a section where snow weight had begun to collapse the rafters. As she studied it, a gust of wind rocked the house. With a groan of timber, a portion of the roof gave way, sending snow and debris crashing into the room below. The crash brought Jason running. "Mom, what happened?" Sarah pulled him back from the edge of the newly formed hole. "The roof couldn't hold the snow weight. We need to clear it before more collapses." The urgency was clear. If the main roof failed, they'd have no shelter at all. Using brooms, poles, and improvised tools, they worked from windows and the remaining stable section of roof, pushing snow off in heavy, dangerous cascades. The work was exhausting, their hands raw, despite gloves, but necessary for survival. As dusk approached, Sarah checked their perimeter one final time. The hair on her neck stood up as she noticed fresh footprints in the snow near the back of the house, too large to be Jason's, leading to and from the woods beyond the property. Someone had been watching them. That night, she kept the rifle close, sleeping fitfully between checking the stove and listening for sounds beyond the wind. Jason slept deeply exhausted from the day's labor, unaware of the new threat. Sarah studied his face in the firelight, so much like her own, nothing of his father there. A small mercy. The doctor had seemed so perfect once successful, charming, the kind of man her parents had approved of immediately. The signs had been there from the beginning, the control disguised as concern, the subtle undermining of her confidence, the distance that grew once she left her nursing career to raise Jason. The affair had been the final betrayal, but not the first. Morning revealed no new footprints, no signs of intrusion. Sarah allowed herself to hope they'd been imaginary, a product of exhaustion and heightened vigilance. They spent the day making further improvements, clearing more rooms, salvaging usable materials, taking inventory of what remained in the house. In the afternoon, Jason called her excitedly to the study where he'd been sorting through books. "Mom, look what I found." He held up an old photograph in a tarnished silver frame, a man and woman standing proudly before the house, new built and pristine. The man stood tall, hand resting protectively on the woman's shoulder. Her face was gentle, eyes bright with promise. That must be them, William and Margaret Harrison. Sarah took the photograph, studying the house as it had been, white-painted, clapboard, ornate trim, a home built with pride and care. It was beautiful once. Jason looked around at the decay surrounding them. Could it be beautiful again? Sarah didn't answer. Hope was a luxury they couldn't afford yet. Their immediate concerns were survival, reaching town, when weather permitted, securing the nursing position that might or might not still be waiting. Yet the question lingered as they continued working. That evening, Thomas Harmon returned his horse, laboring through the snow with supplies, firewood, salt, flour, coffee, and kerosene for the lamps. He refused payment, waving away Sarah's protests. "Consider it welcome to the valley. Been a while since anyone showed gumption enough to tackle this old place." Over coffee, Thomas shared information about Mill Creek, a town of 800 souls surviving primarily on cattle ranching, logging, and the railroad line that connected it to Denver. The clinic where Sarah hoped to work was still in desperate need of a trained nurse, especially one with military experience. As daylight faded, Thomas grew serious. "Those tracks you mentioned, likely the Tucker brothers. Local trouble hired muscle for Victor Reed." Sarah tensed. "Who's Reed?" Thomas's weathered face hardened. "Owns the bank, the general store, half the valley now. Been buying up every parcel he can get. Made offers on this place for years, but old William wouldn't sell, not even when he was starving. After William died, the property got tangled in legal knots, no will, no clear heir." The name carved on the wall, Reed Property, took on new significance. "Why's he want it so badly?" Thomas shrugged, but his eyes held something back. "Man like Reed collects land, like some collect coins. Power for power's sake." He glanced out the darkening window. "You'd best lock up tight tonight. Tucker boys don't take kindly to being disturbed in their winter hideout." After Thomas left, Sarah redoubled her security measures, barricading doors and keeping the rifle within reach. She explained to Jason in terms a 9-year-old could understand that they might have uninvited visitors who thought the house was abandoned. "But it's not abandoned anymore," Jason said with a child's simple logic. "We live here now." Sarah corrected him gently. "We're just staying until we can get to town. Remember, this isn't our home." Something in Jason's face closed off the look he'd worn through the divorce, the moves, the nights in cheap motels when money ran short. "Then where is our home?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. Their apartment in Denver was long gone, rented to new tenants, their furniture sold to cover legal fees. Home had become a theoretical concept, something that existed in the future, always just out of reach. That night, as Jason slept, Sarah continued reading William's journal by lamplight. His words painted a portrait of a man consumed by grief, yet sustained by love. Love for a woman, for the home they'd built, for the life they'd planned together. His final entries revealed a man who knew death approached, but faced it with strange peace, certain he would reunite with Margaret. The third day dawned clear, but bitterly cold. The thermometer Thomas had brought showed 15 below zero. They focused on insulating the house, better stuffing rags into gaps, hanging more blankets over windows, banking the stove, to maintain consistent heat. In the afternoon, while checking the barn for usable materials, Sarah discovered an old toolbox containing specialized carpentry tools. With these, she was able to make more substantial repairs, securing loose boards, reinforcing weak spots in the floor, patching the worst roof leaks with materials salvaged from less important sections of the house. Jason worked alongside her, showing surprising aptitude for practical tasks. He'd never had the chance to learn such things from his father, whose idea of manual labor had been changing the batteries in his golf cart. As the sun set, Sarah felt a growing unease. The footprints had reappeared multiple sets now circling the house at a distance, then retreating toward the forest line. Someone was watching, assessing planning. She checked the Winchester again, ensuring it was loaded and accessible. She kept Jason close that night, both of them sleeping in the main room by the stove. She told him stories from her childhood in Montana, tales of her own father teaching her to fish and hunt, to respect the land and the animals that provided their food. Jason listened with hungry attention, starved for stories of family beyond the broken one he knew. "Will my dad ever come see us in our new home?" Jason asked suddenly, his voice small in the firelight. Sarah's heart clenched. The truth was that Dr. Parker had shown minimal interest in custody, viewing his son as an unwanted complication in his new life with the hospital administrator. The court-mandated monthly visits had dwindled to occasional phone calls, then to nothing at all. She'd stopped making excuses for him months ago. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we have each other. That's what matters most." Jason was quiet for a long moment. "Thomas said Mr. Harrison built this house for his wife because he loved her. Dad never built anything." The insight, so clear from a child's perspective, hung in the air between them. Before Sarah could respond, a sound came from outside, the deliberate crunch of footsteps in snow circling toward the back of the house. Sarah extinguished the lamp, immediately moving to the window with practiced silence. In the moonlight reflecting off snow, she saw two figures approaching the back entrance. Large men in heavy coats, one carrying what appeared to be a crowbar. They moved with the confidence of those who expected no resistance. She positioned Jason in the pantry, the most defensible room with only one entrance, and gave him firm instructions to stay silent no matter what he heard. Then she took up position beside the back door, Winchester ready, listening to the sounds of metal working against the lock. When the door finally gave with a splintering crack, Sarah spoke from the darkness, her voice steady. "The next one goes through whoever steps across that threshold." She worked the lever action of the rifle, the metallic sound unmistakable in the silence. The intruders froze. One cursed under his breath. The other laughed, an ugly sound without humor. "Well, now it looks like someone's playing house in our winter spot." The voice was slurred with alcohol, threatening. "This ain't your property, lady. Best clear out before things get unpleasant." Sarah didn't move, didn't respond to the bait. Her finger rested beside the trigger, not on it, military discipline holding, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Leave now, I won't ask twice." The larger shadow shifted, taking half a step forward. "You hear that, Daryl? The lady's giving orders." He raised his voice. "This house belongs to Mr. Reed now, same as everything else in this valley. We're just making sure it stays empty like he wants." When the man took another step forward, Sarah fired the shot deliberately high, splintering the door frame inches above his head. The report was deafening in the confined space, echoing off the walls. Both men recoiled, stumbling backward into the snow. "Crazy bitch," one shouted, genuine fear replacing the bravado. "You could have killed me." "That wasn't the goal," Sarah answered calmly. "Next time will be different." The men retreated, one helping the other through the deep snow. At the edge of the clearing, the larger one turned back, his face visible in moonlight, broad, brutal features contorted with rage. "This ain't over. The Harrison place belongs to Reed. You'll learn that soon enough." After they'd gone, Sarah repaired the door as best she could, barricading it with a heavy oak sideboard from the dining room. She found Jason exactly where she'd left him, wide-eyed but composed. He didn't ask questions, just helped her secure the house without being told. They slept in shifts that night, one always awake and watching. The intruders didn't return, but their threat lingered in every creak of the house, every moan of wind through the eaves. Dawn brought Thomas Harmon earlier than his usual schedule, concern etched on his face. "Heard shots last night. Figured I'd check on you folks." His eyes took in the damaged door, the makeshift barricade, the rifle now openly displayed on the table. Sarah explained what had happened while Jason prepared coffee, a task he'd taken pride in mastering over their few days in the house. Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through silver hair. "Those would be the Tucker brothers, Daryl and Jim. Mean drunks work as enforcers for Reed when they're sober enough." He accepted the coffee Jason offered, nodding thanks. They won't take kindly to being shown up, especially by a woman. They're welcome to try again, Sarah replied, checking the rifle's mechanism with practiced hands. I wasn't aiming to miss next time. Thomas studied her with new respect, recognizing the competence in her movements. Military and army, combat medic, 2 tours in Afghanistan. She met his gaze levelly. I can handle myself. A slight smile tugged at Thomas's mouth. Seems so. His expression grew serious again. But Reed doesn't fight fair and he doesn't give up. Once he decides he wants something, he finds a way to get it. Been that way since he came to the valley 20 years back. Why does he want this particular property so badly? Sarah gestured around at the decaying house. It's falling apart miles from town. Thomas's eyes shifted away momentarily. Some say it's the land itself, good water-sheltered position. Others think it's just because William Harrison was the only man who ever refused to sell to him. Reed doesn't take rejection well. As Thomas prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. Weather's supposed to clear next week. Road to town should be passable then, if you're still planning to move on. Sarah nodded, though something in her had shifted during the night. The threat had crystallized, her thinking turned abstract danger into concrete purpose. This house, broken cold, forgotten, had sheltered them when they had nothing. She'd defended it once already. The thought of abandoning it to Reed and his thugs left a bitter taste. After Thomas left, Sarah and Jason continued their work now with greater urgency. Every repair strengthened not just the house but their position within it. Every improvement felt less like temporary survival and more like investment in possibility. That afternoon, while reinforcing floor joists in the study, Sarah's hammer struck a hollow space beneath the floorboards, different from the hiding spot where she'd found the rifle. Prying up the boards revealed another cavity, this one containing a small iron box, its surface etched with ornate scrollwork. Inside lay more of William's papers, land deeds, property records, tax documents, dating back to the 1880s. Most significant was a hand-drawn map of the Harrison property, showing it to be far larger than the house and immediate surroundings, nearly 500 acres of valley land, stretching from the ridgeline behind the house to the creek that must run along the road Thomas used. Beneath these papers lay another journal, smaller, older, bound in faded blue leather. This one contained Margaret's handwriting, delicate yet determined. Her entries chronicled the building of the house, the struggles of establishing a ranch in the harsh Colorado climate, and her deep love for the land and for William. The final entry, dated just days before her death, read, "Snow's coming early this year. William's gone to check the north pasture fence before the worst hits. I worry when he's gone too long, though he'd laugh to hear me say it. This valley holds us like a cupped hand, sheltered precious. Even in the deepest cold, I feel its warmth beneath the surface waiting. Our home will stand long after we're gone. I pray whoever finds it will love it as we have." Jason found Sarah sitting motionless, the journal open in her hands, her eyes distant. "Mom, what did you find?" She showed him the map, explained what it meant. "This house is part of something larger. The Harrisons owned all of this land, mountains, forest, the creek." Jason traced the property lines with his finger. "So this could really be ours, a real home?" Sarah didn't answer directly. The legal complications Thomas had mentioned would surely apply. The property had been abandoned for decades. Reed clearly had designs on it. They were strangers here with no claim beyond necessity. And yet Margaret's words echoed in her mind, "I pray whoever finds it will love it as we have." The coincidence seemed too perfect to dismiss their desperate need, the broken wagon, the house waiting with its secrets and its strength. That evening, Sarah sat by the stove making calculations in William's old ledger. Their meager savings, the cost of materials to make essential repairs, the salary she might earn at the clinic, the legal expenses of claiming abandoned property. The numbers didn't add up to certainty, but they didn't spell impossibility either. Jason watched her from his place on the bearskin rug, sensing the importance of her thoughts. "Are we staying, Mom, for real?" Before she could answer, a sound came from outside, hoofbeats approaching through snow. She reached for the rifle automatically, but recognized Thomas's distinctive whistle as he approached the house, a courtesy he'd adopted to announce himself after the incident with the Tucker brothers. He brought news from town. The clinic was indeed holding the nursing position for her, having received her letter of application weeks ago. The roads would likely be clear enough for travel in 4 days if the weather held. and his expression darkened as he reported this. Reed had filed paperwork claiming the Harrison property through adverse possession, a legal maneuver that might give him ownership without purchase if no heirs came forward to contest it. How long has he been trying this? Sarah asked, mind racing through implications. Filed 3 days ago, according to my source at the county office. Thomas accepted the coffee she offered, warming his hands around the mug. Timing's interesting, wouldn't you say? Right after you folks showed up. Sarah shared what she'd discovered, the map, Margaret's journal, the extent of the original Harrison property. Thomas studied the documents with growing amazement. This changes things. Reed's claim is based on the property being abandoned and neglected. If there's clear documentation of the original boundaries and someone occupying and improving the place. He didn't finish the thought, but Sarah understood the implication. Her presence in the house, the improvements they'd made, could potentially block Reed's legal maneuver. Would it be enough, she asked. Legally speaking, Thomas considered, weighing his words carefully. Colorado squatters' rights are complicated. Normally takes 18 years of open notorious possession. But with the original deed's evidence of intent to maintain and improve, it creates complications Reed wouldn't want. Might be enough to stall him while you establish proper residency. The possibility hung between them, a risk, a gamble, but one with purpose behind it. Thomas didn't press for a decision, respecting that the choice was hers alone. Before leaving, he promised to bring more supplies in 2 days, including materials, to properly secure the doors and windows against further intrusion. That night, as Jason slept peacefully for the first time since their arrival, Sarah made her decision. The Harrison house, the cold house as Thomas had called it, had sheltered them when they had nothing. Its walls, though damaged, still stood against winter storms and human threats alike. William and Margaret had built it with love and purpose. Their words, preserved through decades, had found their way to her as if intended. This house was made from love, William had written. It will not die unless forgotten. Sarah whispered into the darkness, a promise to those who had come before and to her son sleeping nearby. We won't let it be forgotten. Morning brought clear skies and renewed purpose. Sarah and Jason began working with systematic intention, not just making emergency repairs, but planning for permanence. They cleared and sanitized the kitchen, properly organized salvageable furniture, took inventory of what would need replacement. Sarah found herself talking to the house as she worked, much as William must have done after Margaret's death. You've stood through worse than this, she murmured, replacing a rotted section of baseboard. We'll get you back on your feet. Jason spent the afternoon outside, clearing snow from the path to the barn, checking on their horse, exploring the immediate surroundings with a child's natural curiosity. When he returned, cheeks red from cold, but eyes bright with excitement, he carried a rough piece of wood he'd found in the barn. Using charcoal from the stove, he carefully lettered a sign, Harrison House, 1887. He showed it to Sarah proudly. Can we put it up by the gate? The simple request contained everything: hope, commitment, belonging. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Yes, we can do that. Together they walked to the broken gate at the property's edge. Using salvaged nails and the hammer from William's toolbox, they secured the sign to the gatepost. It wasn't much crude lettering on weathered wood, but it was a declaration nonetheless. The cold house would be cold no longer. As they stood back to admire their handiwork, Jason slipped his hand into Sarah's, a gesture he'd begun to consider himself too old for in recent months. Dad never gave us a real home, he said quietly. But we found one anyway. Sarah squeezed his hand, looking back at the house on the hill, broken, wounded, but standing. Like them. Yes, she answered simply. We did. The days that followed blurred into one long stretch of white and gray. Snow kept falling, softer now, but relentless, muffling every sound until the world seemed to hold its breath. Sarah and Jason built a rhythm out of necessity. Feed the stove, melt snow, repair what could be repaired. The work became a language between them, a way of speaking hope without naming it. Each morning, Sarah walked the perimeter of the property, studying the sagging barn, the hollow windows upstairs, the fence line half buried in drifts. She found herself addressing the house directly, murmuring encouragement as she worked. Perhaps loneliness made her do it, or perhaps William's habit of speaking to absent Margaret had seeped into the walls themselves, teaching new residents to do the same. Jason took to the task with surprising enthusiasm, his city-bred hands growing calloused and capable. He'd never shown interest in building or fixing things before his world in Denver had been video games and reluctant soccer practice. Here necessity transformed him. He learned to split kindling without slicing his fingers to bank the fire overnight, so embers would await them at dawn, to recognize the different moans of wind that signaled weather changes. Beneath the floorboards in what had been William's study, Sarah discovered a toolbox containing specialized carpentry tools, chisels, planes, a brace, and bit sets still sharp, despite decades of disuse. With these, she addressed the house's most pressing wounds. The broken back door received a new frame harvested from less essential parts of the barn. Loose floorboards were secured. The hole in the roof was patched with salvaged tin and carefully sealed against further leaks. Sarah's military training proved unexpectedly valuable. The Army had taught her emergency field medicine, but also practical survival, how to improvise, how to prioritize tasks when everything seemed urgent, how to recognize when good enough would have to suffice until better became possible. The water pump required 3 days of stubborn effort. Frozen pipes thawed reluctantly under careful heating. The ancient iron mechanism protested, then surrendered to persistence. When clear water finally gushed into the kitchen sink, Jason danced around the room in triumph, as if they'd struck gold instead of simply restoring what once existed. On the 5th day, Thomas arrived with his promised supplies boards for proper window repairs, roofing materials, nails, tools, and food stores to supplement their dwindling provisions. He worked alongside them through the afternoon, his weathered hands moving with the confident efficiency of someone who'd built and fixed things his entire life. While they worked, Thomas shared stories of the valley, how it had been cattle country originally, then shifted toward logging as the railroad made timber transport viable. How Mill Creek had once been a bustling town of over 2,000 souls before the mine closed in '79. How Reed had arrived 20 years ago with Eastern money and methodical ambition, buying foreclosed properties during hard times, accumulating land and influence until half the town worked for him directly or indirectly. Sarah noticed how Jason followed Thomas with eager attention, absorbing every word, mimicking his movements when he demonstrated how to properly set a nail or measure for a cut. The boy had never had this, a man who taught practical skills with patient guidance, who answered questions directly without condescension. His father had been perpetually busy, eternally distracted by more important matters than a child's curiosity. In the kitchen, while Jason helped Thomas repair cabinet hinges, Sarah broached the subject she'd avoided. "You mentioned legal complications with this property. What exactly happens if we decide to stay?" Thomas measured his words carefully, hands still working steadily. "Colorado adverse possession laws require 18 years of continuous occupation under normal circumstances. But with the original deeds you found, and if you can prove continuous improvement and intention to permanently occupy, it creates a different legal situation. Reed's claim through abandonment would be contested by your active residency." Sarah processed this, running calculations in her mind. "We'd need a lawyer." Thomas nodded. "Judge Martha Kingsley in Mill Creek is fair-minded. Doesn't bow to Reed's influence like some do. Be worth talking to her once you can make it to town." That evening, after Thomas departed with promises to return in 4 days, Sarah and Jason continued exploring the house more systematically. The upper bedrooms yielded little beyond personal effects, too damaged by time and weather to preserve. The dining room contained a hutch with tarnished silver and cracked china, once fine things now reduced to fragile remnants. Jason discovered a door off the kitchen pantry they'd previously overlooked, thinking it a closet. Beyond lay narrow servants' stairs leading to the attic. The space above stretched the length of the house, littered with forgotten items, trunks of clothing, broken furniture, stacks of yellowed newspapers dating back to the 1880s. The real treasure was a box of photographs, daguerreotypes, and early Kodak prints preserved in a cedar chest that had protected them from moisture. William and Margaret through the years, from youth to middle age. The house in its prime, white-painted and proud against mountain backdrop. Cattle in the valley below. Christmases and harvests, moments of ordinary life made precious by time's passage. Sarah laid these images out carefully, piecing together the story of the people who'd built this place, whose spirits still seemed to linger in its bones. One photograph showed a magnificent spring on the property water, bubbling up between rocks to form a clear pool. Penciled on the back in Margaret's handwriting, "Our Blessing, 1892. Later that night, after Jason fell asleep, Sarah continued reading Margaret's journal. Entries described the spring as sweet water, that never froze even in deepest winter. Margaret credited it with curing her lingering cough one summer and claimed local Ute had considered it sacred ground long before white settlers arrived. Was this why Reed wanted the property so badly? For a water source that remained accessible through winter months? The puzzle pieces didn't quite align. Something remained hidden, a connection she couldn't yet see. The next morning brought sunshine and bitter cold, the temperature plummeting to 20 below, despite clear skies. The stove demanded constant feeding, consuming wood at an alarming rate. Their salvaged pile from the barn was dwindling rapidly. Sarah ventured farther onto the property, seeking fallen timber they could process. Beyond the stand of pines where their horse sheltered, she found a promising deadfall. A massive pine toppled years earlier, its trunk seasoned by exposure. As she surveyed it, calculating how to break it down without proper equipment, the crack of a twig behind her sent her spinning, instantly alert. A man stood watching from the tree line, not one of the Tucker brothers, but someone equally threatening in his manicured appearance. Tall, expensively dressed, despite the weather, his silver hair contrasting with a face too smooth for its years. He didn't approach, merely studied her with calculating eyes before turning away, disappearing into the woods as silently as he'd appeared. Sarah hurried back to the house, an ease prickling between her shoulder blades. She reinforced their security measures and kept Jason inside for the remainder of the day, the rifle close at hand. She didn't mention the watcher to her son, unwilling to frighten him unnecessarily, but her vigilance doubled. That night, a new storm moved through the valley, driving snow against the windows like thrown gravel. Sarah woke before dawn, stomach cramping violently. She barely reached the kitchen sink before vomiting. Minutes later, Jason appeared in the doorway, face pale and sweating despite the cold. "Mom, I don't feel good." For hours, they suffered through waves of nausea and stomach pain. Sarah recognized the symptoms of contamination, not food poisoning from their meager supplies, but something in the water. The timing after her encounter in the woods couldn't be coincidence. By noon, both were severely dehydrated, too weak to maintain the fire properly. The house grew colder as the stove's heat faded. Sarah struggled to focus, her medical training warring with the toxins in her system. They couldn't drink the water, couldn't melt snow quickly enough, without fire couldn't reach help through the storm. The sound of the front door opening barely registered through Sarah's fever. Heavy footsteps crossed to the kitchen. Thomas's voice came as if from underwater. "Dear God." He knelt beside her, his lined face swimming in her vision. "Water's been tampered with. Should have warned you they might try this." Through her delirium, Sarah watched Thomas work with methodical urgency. He rebuilt the fire, then melted clean snow from outside. From his saddlebags came a small bottle of medicine-activated charcoal to absorb toxins. He administered it to both of them, then prepared a rehydration solution of salt, sugar, and clean water. Hours passed in a haze of misery and gradual improvement. By evening, Sarah could sit upright, though weakness still trembled through her limbs. Jason slept fitfully on his bearskin rug, color slowly returning to his face. Thomas had brought blankets from his own cabin, wrapping them in layers against the chill. Through cracked lips, Sarah managed her first coherent question. "How did you know to come?" Thomas stoked the fire, his expression grim. "Saw Jim Tucker filling canteens at the creek yesterday. Mentioned he was headed up this way to check on things. Didn't like the sound of it, but the storm delayed me." His eyes met hers, regret evident. This is how Reed operates. Never directly, always through others with plausible deniability. When dawn broke, Thomas helped Sarah locate the property's original well, long unused but potentially salvageable 100 yards behind the house. The pump had been sabotaged, traces of kerosene evident in the water. Thomas dismantled it completely, cleaning each component while explaining how the contamination had likely been introduced through the main line. The work was slow, Sarah still weak from illness, but by midday they had restored the well to functioning condition. Thomas tested the water first, declaring it clean. They won't try the same trick twice. Too obvious. But they'll try something else. Over the following days, as Sarah and Jason regained their strength, Thomas became a more frequent visitor. He brought news from town. The clinic still held the nursing position, though they were growing impatient. The roads would be clear enough for travel within a week if weather held. Most significantly, Reed had been making inquiries about the Harrison property, pressing county officials to expedite his adverse possession claim. Thomas also brought parts for proper locks, installing them himself on doors and ground floor windows. He showed Jason basic woodworking skills, teaching him to repair the broken leg of the toy horse they'd found upstairs. Together, they crafted a small chest for Jason's growing collection of treasures, interesting stones, a hawk feather, artifacts of their new life. Sarah observed their interactions with complex emotion. Jason had never connected with a male figure this way. Her ex-husband had viewed parenting as an obligation to be scheduled and delegated, not a relationship to be cultivated. Watching her son absorb practical knowledge from Thomas's patient instruction awakened both gratitude and a wistfulness she hadn't expected. Thomas himself remained something of an enigma. Bits of his history emerged gradually. Vietnam service with Special Forces, then years as Mill Creek's sheriff before stepping down after a conflict with county officials he wouldn't elaborate on. Now he lived alone in a cabin halfway between town and the Harrison place, serving as mail carrier to the valley's outlying areas. His knowledge of the region, its people, and its politics was encyclopedic, though he shared it selectively as if measuring how much Sarah was ready to hear. On the 10th day, as they worked to repair loose siding on the house's western wall, Thomas paused hammer mid-swing. "Riders coming, 3 of them." His voice carried no alarm, but Sarah noted how he positioned himself slightly between her and the approaching horsemen. The trio that crested the hill moved with obvious purpose, 2 men flanking a third who rode slightly ahead, his posture radiating authority. Even from a distance, Sarah recognized the silver-haired man from the woods, now mounted on an expensive black stallion that pranced nervously in the snow. Thomas stepped forward as they approached, his stance casual but alert. "Victor, bit far from your usual haunts." The silver-haired man dismounted with fluid grace despite his age. Up close, he presented a study in calculated impression, tailored coat, leather gloves, boots worth a month of nurse's wages. His smile revealed perfect teeth, too white to be natural. "Thomas, still playing postman, I see. Though today you appear to be playing carpenter as well." His gaze shifted to Sarah, assessment in his pale eyes. "Mrs. Parker, I presume." "Victor Reed, I own most of the properties in this valley, including, I believe, the one you are currently occupying." The immediate claim of ownership confirmed everything Thomas had warned about. Sarah met Reed's stare evenly, refusing to be intimidated despite her physical disadvantage, still weakened from the poisoning his men had orchestrated. "The documentation I've found suggests otherwise, Mr. Reed." Something flickered across Reed's smooth face, surprise quickly masked. He gestured to one of his companions, a thin man clutching a leather portfolio who dismounted and approached with nervous deference. "My attorney, Mr. Peterson, has the relevant paperwork. The Harrison property reverted to county ownership for tax delinquency in 1901. I purchased it legally in 2007. Peterson extended documents with shaking hands. Thomas intercepted them, reviewing each page with deliberate slowness before passing them to Sarah. The papers appeared official county letterhead, official stamps, signatures showing a clear chain of ownership, ending with Reed's acquisition 18 years earlier. If these documents were legitimate, they invalidated everything Sarah had found. But the dates conflicted with William's journals, which continued well past 1901. And the property boundaries described were significantly smaller than the map they'd discovered, just the house and immediate surroundings, nothing of the larger acreage or the spring. Sarah handed the papers back. "Interesting. These conflict with the original deeds and tax records we found in the house. William Harrison maintained ownership and paid taxes through 1896 at minimum." Reed's smile tightened fractionally. "Old papers easily misinterpreted by someone unfamiliar with Colorado property law. I understand you're new to our community, Mrs. Parker, a single mother in difficult circumstances." His tone conveyed sympathy that never reached his eyes. "I'd be happy to offer you compensation for any improvements you've made to the property. Say $500 enough to secure lodging in town until you're established." The amount, insultingly small, clarified his assessment of her situation. He viewed her as desperate, ignorant, easily manipulated by the appearance of authority and a token payment. The same tactics had likely worked countless times with others in vulnerable positions. Sarah felt Thomas tense beside her, restraining himself from interruption. This was her battle to fight. "That's generous, Mr. Reed, but I'm not looking to sell." Reed's manufactured geniality slipped further. "I wasn't offering to buy Mrs. Parker. I was offering compensation for your inconvenience before you vacate my property. I have concerns about your safety out here, a woman alone with a child miles from assistance. The winter can be treacherous for those unaccustomed to its dangers. The threat beneath his concern was unmistakable. Sarah maintained her composure, military training, providing the discipline needed to face down intimidation. We've managed so far. Thomas has been very helpful with local knowledge. Reed glanced at Thomas, something passing between the men, old animosity unresolved. Has he indeed? Our former sheriff has many skills, though legal expertise isn't among them as history demonstrated. He turned back to Sarah. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider, Mrs. Parker. After that, I'll be forced to pursue formal eviction through the courts. The process can be quite unpleasant, especially for a newcomer hoping to establish professional connections in a small community. With that, he remounted his horse, nodding curtly to his companions. As they turned to leave, Reed paused. Oh, and Mrs. Parker, I'd have that well water tested before drinking more of it. Iron content in this region can cause terrible stomach distress. Wouldn't want you or the boy falling ill out here all alone. The naked acknowledgement of their poisoning delivered with a smile chilled Sarah more than any overt threat could have. These were not men constrained by ordinary boundaries of conscience or law. After they'd gone, Thomas spat into the snow. 18 years. He claims he bought it 18 years ago because that's the adverse possession threshold in Colorado. Convenient timing. Sarah studied the retreating figures. His documents looked convincing. Thomas's weathered face hardened. County records can be adjusted when the right people are paid. Reed's had the clerk's office in his pocket for decades. He turned to her, eyes serious. This escalates things. He wouldn't come himself unless he felt threatened. Whatever you found in this house has him worried. That evening, after Thomas departed with promises to inquire discreetly about the property's legal status, Sarah and Jason continued their systematic exploration of the house. The confrontation with Reed had given their search new urgency. Somewhere within these walls lay proof that could contradict his claims, evidence substantial enough to make a powerful man nervous. Jason focused on the study, methodically examining each book on the shelves, looking for hidden compartments or additional documents tucked between pages. Sarah tackled the master bedroom, searching for loose floorboards or concealed spaces where William might have stored important papers. As sunset painted the snow-covered landscape in amber light, Jason called out excitedly from downstairs. Sarah found him in the study, practically vibrating with discovery. Mom, look what happens when I pull this book. He demonstrated, tugging on a large leather-bound volume. A soft click sounded, and a section of the bookcase swung inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. The hidden room measured perhaps 8 by 10 feet, its existence completely concealed within the house's architecture. A small desk occupied one wall, its surface covered with maps and documents protected from decay by the sealed environment. A single chair, a kerosene lamp, shelves holding leather-bound journals, dozens of them, far more than they'd previously discovered. Sarah examined the maps first. The largest showed the complete Harrison property, 500 acres extending from the ridgeline behind the house to well beyond the creek, encompassing Forest Meadow, and a significant portion of what must now be Reed's holdings. Marked in red ink near the property's center was the spring they'd seen in photographs, its location precisely noted. Smaller maps provided greater detail of the spring itself: geological surveys, water flow measurements, chemical analysis results. One document dated 1889 contained a laboratory assessment from Denver. Water sample exhibits unusual mineral composition consistent with therapeutic hot springs. High lithium and magnesium content suggest potential medicinal applications. Another folder contained correspondence between William and investors from Denver and Chicago, all expressing interest in developing the spring as a health resort. William's replies consistently declined these offers, citing his and Margaret's desire to preserve the natural setting and ensure the water remained accessible to local residents regardless of financial means. The final document, the one that illuminated everything, was a geological survey commissioned by Victor Reed in 2005. It confirmed the spring's unusual properties and estimated its commercial value as a bottled water source at several $1 million annually, with additional potential for a luxury spa development. Paperclipped to this was a handwritten note. Confirm Harrison title status. Proceed with acquisition plan if clear. Otherwise implement alternative strategy. Sarah sat heavily in William's chair, the pieces finally aligned. Reed hadn't wanted the dilapidated house or even the land itself. He wanted the spring, a natural resource worth millions that William and Margaret Harrison had deliberately protected from exploitation. His alternative strategy had clearly involved manipulating property records to establish ownership without purchase, waiting the required 18 years to claim the land through adverse possession. Their arrival had disrupted the timeline. After nearly 2 decades of patience, Reed was mere months from legally claiming the spring when Sarah and Jason had unwittingly occupied the house, challenging his adverse possession strategy. Jason pulled another journal from the shelf, opening it carefully. "Mom, listen to this." He read slowly, tracing the words with his finger. "I will not sell our blessing to become another man's fortune. The water healed Margaret when doctors could not. It belongs to the earth and to those who need its mercy, not to those who would bottle God's grace and sell it by the ounce." The boy looked up, understanding beyond his years in his eyes. "That's why Mr. Reed wants our house so badly. For the magic water." Sarah nodded, still processing the implications. "And why the Harrisons built here specifically?" "They were protecting it." Footsteps on the porch interrupted their discovery. Thomas returning earlier than expected, his expression grim as Sarah let him in. Without preamble, he delivered his news. "Reed's filed eviction papers. Claims you're trespassing on property he's owned for 18 years. Hearing set for next Wednesday." Sarah showed him their discovery, the hidden room, the maps, the documentation of the spring's value. Reed's survey proving his knowledge and intentions. Thomas examined each item methodically, his face darkening with each new piece of evidence. "This explains everything, why Reed's been so determined, why he's accelerated his timeline." Thomas spread the maps across the desk. "With this documentation and William's journals, we have enough to challenge Reed's claim. Judge Kingsley would be interested in how county records magically changed to show a sale that conflicts with all this evidence." A new sense of purpose crystallized between them, no longer just about Sarah finding a home, but about honoring the Harrisons' intentions and preventing Reed from seizing what they'd tried to protect. The following morning, Sarah and Jason began cataloging their evidence, organizing William's journals chronologically, documenting the chain of ownership through tax records and deeds. Thomas brought a camera to photograph everything, creating backup copies of critical documents. As they worked, Thomas explained the legal process ahead, how they would need to file a counterclaim, challenging Reed's ownership, how they would present evidence of document tampering, how Sarah could establish her claim as a good faith occupant, improving abandoned property. Jason, sorting through more of William's journals, suddenly gasped. "Mom, Mr. Thomas, look at this." He held up a small metal box that had been concealed behind the final row of books. The box's lid bore an ornate H worked into its design. Inside lay the ultimate prize, the original deed to the Harrison property, dated 1885, with official government seals and signatures still clearly legible. Accompanying it was a property tax payment record book with entries through December 1896, directly contradicting Reed's claim that the property had been abandoned for tax delinquency in 1901. Most damning was a letter from the county assessor dated 1807 acknowledging receipt of tax payments for that year from the Harrison estate. Thomas whistled softly. "This is it. Proof positive that Reed's documents are forgeries. The county records must have been altered to create his ownership claim." As they celebrated this discovery, a new sound interrupted multiple vehicles approaching the house. Through the window, they saw 3 men on horseback accompanied by 2 automobiles struggling through the snow-covered road. Reed led the procession, followed by his attorney and both Tucker brothers. The cars contained what appeared to be county officials, a sheriff's deputy, and another man in formal attire carrying a briefcase. Thomas's expression hardened. Reed's accelerated his timeline. "That's Judge Wilson, his pocket judge, not Kingsley. They're here to execute the eviction immediately, not waiting for the scheduled hearing." Sarah gathered their most crucial evidence, the original deed tax records, and Reed's survey of the springs, securing them inside her jacket. Jason, sensing the gravity of the situation, moved closer to her side. Thomas positioned himself on the porch as the procession arrived, his stance casual but his eyes alert. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Bit far from the courthouse for official business." Reed dismounted smoothly, his smile thin and triumphant. "No need for theatrics, Thomas. We're here on official county business." He gestured to the man with the briefcase. "Judge Wilson has reviewed my ownership claim and signed an emergency eviction order. Mrs. Parker and her son are to vacate immediately. The judge, a paunchy man with an alcoholic's broken capillaries mapping his nose, avoided direct eye contact as he presented the document. The order is quite clear. This property belongs to Mr. Reed through purchase in 2007. The current occupants have no legal right to remain. Thomas accepted the paper, reviewing it with deliberate slowness while buying time. Sarah joined him on the porch, Jason half hidden behind her. The Tucker brothers watched with barely concealed eagerness, clearly anticipating conflict. Thomas handed the eviction order to Sarah, then addressed the judge directly. Interesting timing, Your Honor, especially given that the scheduled hearing isn't until next week. An interesting venue conducting court business from Mr. Reed's automobile rather than your courtroom. The judge flushed defensive. The law doesn't require, Thomas cut him off, his voice shifting subtly, no longer the amiable mail carrier, but the former sheriff accustomed to command. The law requires quite a bit, actually, including proper jurisdiction, which you've overstepped by conducting proceedings outside your district without proper notice. He turned to the deputy. And you, Jenkins, executing an eviction without the required 48-hour notice is a procedural violation. The deputy shifted uncomfortably, suddenly uncertain. Thomas pressed his advantage. More importantly, we've discovered evidence directly contradicting Mr. Reed's ownership claim. He nodded to Sarah, who produced the original deed and tax records. Reed's composure slipped momentarily. Those documents are irrelevant. My purchase in 2007 supersedes any historical. Your purchase never occurred, Sarah interrupted, finding strength in the truth their discovery had revealed. These records prove the Harrison estate maintained ownership through at least 1897, directly contradicting your claim of county acquisition in 1901. And this, she held up the geological survey, proves you've known about the spring's value since 2005, motivating your attempt to seize the property through falsified records. The judge blanched, looking to Reed for guidance. The Tucker brothers exchanged glances, tension building as they sensed the situation deteriorating. Reed's attorney began a stammering objection, but Reed silenced him with a gesture. For a moment, silence held the tableau. Reed calculating, Thomas watchful, Sarah standing her ground with Jason beside her. Then Reed's expression shifted to something colder, more dangerous. James, he addressed the larger Tucker brother, explain to Mrs. Parker what happens to people who interfere with legal proceedings in this county. The implied threat broke the standoff. The deputy stepped forward, torn between competing authorities. I can't execute an eviction if there's disputed ownership, Mr. Reed, not without proper court review of these new documents. Reed's face hardened, his veneer of civility cracking to reveal the ruthlessness beneath. Jenkins, your father's medical bills are paid by my company insurance. Your sister's job at my store includes housing. Consider carefully which side of this dispute serves your family's interests. The deputy faltered, the naked threat affecting him visibly. Thomas recognized the moment's critical nature and made his decision. He stepped forward, physically placing himself between Reed's group and Sarah. That sounded remarkably like witness tampering, Victor. On top of document fraud and abuse of judicial process. I wonder how the State Bar Association would view Judge Wilson's participation in this little field trip. The judge retreated a step, self-preservation overtaking loyalty. Perhaps we should continue this matter in court, with all evidence properly submitted. Reed recognized his tactical defeat. The judge was wavering, the deputy uncomfortable, the legal pretense crumbling. But his parting words carried menacing promise. Very well, we'll resolve this through proper channels, though I wonder how Mrs. Parker and the boy will manage when the next storm hits. These old houses can be so dangerous, fire, structural failures. Tragic accidents happen in winter isolation. With that, he signaled retreat. The Tucker brothers lingered, Jim spitting on the ground near Thomas's feet before following. The procession departed much as it had arrived, though the unified front had fractured visibly. After they'd gone, Thomas remained vigilant, watching until the last vehicle disappeared around the valley bend. That was too close. Reed doesn't usually miscalculate like this, coming himself, bringing the judge and deputy. He's desperate to resolve this before your evidence becomes part of the official record. Sarah's military instincts recognized the tactical situation. We need to get these documents to the county seat, file them formally, and we need copies somewhere safe as insurance. Thomas nodded grimly. Roads to Mill Creek should be passable tomorrow if weather holds. I'll take photographs of everything to my contact at the Denver Post Insurance against further tampering. But tonight, he glanced at the sky where dark clouds gathered ominously. Tonight, we prepare for siege. Reed won't risk coming himself again, but the Tucker brothers operate with more latitude. They spent the remainder of daylight fortifying the house, boarding vulnerable windows, creating defensive positions, establishing protocols for various scenarios. Thomas brought additional ammunition for the Winchester from his cabin, along with emergency supplies should they be cut off for an extended period. As darkness fell, sleet began striking the windows like thrown pebbles, escalating to a torrent within hours. The temperature plummeted, transforming rain to ice that encased every surface in crystalline armor. By midnight, the storm had become a full blizzard wind, howling around the eaves with banshee fury. Sarah maintained watch from the front bedroom window, the rifle across her lap, while Thomas guarded the rear approaches and Jason slept fitfully in the protected interior room they designated as their fallback position. The house creaked and shuddered under the storm's assault, but the repairs they'd made held firm. Near dawn, a different sound penetrated the storm's roar, human shouting, desperate and faint. Sarah alerted Thomas, who joined her at the window. Through swirling snow, they made out a figure struggling up the hill from the creek, a man moving with the uncoordinated motions of someone in the late stages of hypothermia. Thomas squinted through the glass. That's Sam Tucker, Jim's younger brother. Sarah calculated odds and outcomes with battlefield efficiency. An enemy at their door, but one in life-threatening distress. Her medical training warred briefly with survival instinct before experience rendered its verdict. Help me get him inside. Together they fought through the storm to reach the staggering man. Sam Tucker was barely conscious, his extremities blue-tinged, his speech slurred with cold. They half-carried him to the house where Sarah's combat medic training took over. She stripped away his frozen clothing, wrapped him in warm blankets, monitored his core temperature as it slowly climbed from dangerous levels. Jason watched from the doorway wide-eyed as Sarah administered emergency care to the man who'd likely helped poison their water days earlier. Why are we helping him? The question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity about this apparent contradiction. Sarah met her son's gaze while continuing to work. Because that's who we are, who we choose to be, regardless of who he is. The simple truth seemed to satisfy Jason, who nodded and brought more blankets without being asked. As Sam regained coherence, confusion clouded his features, finding himself alive, warm, being tended by those he'd been sent to intimidate. His eyes darted between Sarah and Thomas, wariness gradually replaced by reluctant gratitude as understanding dawned. Truck broke through creek ice, he managed through chattering teeth. Jim and others got out, headed back to town. Couldn't make it, current took me downstream. He swallowed painfully. Wouldn't be alive if you hadn't. The sentence remained unfinished, the implication clear. Thomas provided hot coffee laced with whiskey from his flask. Why were you crossing the creek in a blizzard, Sam? What was so urgent it couldn't wait for morning? The younger Tucker stared into his mug for a long moment before answering. Reed paid us to burn you out, make it look like an accident with the stove. Nobody'd question it in this weather. His gaze lifted to Sarah's. Jim wanted to wait until you were asleep. I said we should make sure the boy got out first. The admission of both planned arson and his own reluctant humanity hung in the air between them. Sarah continued treating his frostbitten extremities, her touch professional, but not unkind. Why is Reed so desperate to get this property? We know about the spring, but this level of urgency seems excessive. Sam hesitated, loyalty warring with his near-death experience and their unexpected mercy. Finally, he sighed. Reed's been planning in this development for nearly 20 years. Has investors from Chicago waiting. Contracts signed contingent on securing water rights by spring thaw. He grimaced as feeling returned painfully to his toes. If he loses the spring now, he loses everything, the investors, the contracts. His whole empire's leveraged on this deal. Thomas exchanged glances with Sarah. This explained Reed's escalating tactics, his willingness to risk legal exposure. He wasn't just fighting for the spring, he was fighting for survival. Sam continued, warming to his confession. He's known about the spring since '98 at least. My father worked for him back then, testing water all through the valley. When they found the Harrison Spring, Reed became obsessed. started falsifying county records, creating his ownership claim, paying off officials to backdate documents. The storm raged through the remainder of the day, transforming the valley into an impassable white wasteland. Sam Tucker, restored to stable condition, but still weak, slept in William's study while Sarah and Thomas discussed their next move. The unexpected intelligence changed their strategic positions significantly. Reed wasn't merely greedy, he was desperate, cornered, and therefore exponentially more dangerous. That evening, as the storm began to abate, they heard a sound that froze their blood, the distinctive crack of ice-laden branches breaking beneath weight. Someone was approaching through the forest behind the house, using the storm's cover to mask their advance. Sarah positioned Jason and the still recovering Sam in the hidden room behind the bookcase, then took up defensive position with Thomas. Through the gathering dusk, they watched dark figures converging on the house, at least 4 men, possibly more, moving with tactical precision through the trees. Jim Tucker's voice carried through the howling wind. "Some you in there? Answer me, boy." When no response came, another voice, Reed's, issued commands. "Spread out. Cover all exits. Remember, we need to make this look accidental. Jenkins, once we're done, your report will confirm faulty wiring caused the fire." "Understood." The deputy's voice replied, trembling but acquiescent. "Yes, sir." Sarah and Thomas exchanged grim looks. Reed had abandoned all pretense of legal process. With county law enforcement compromised in participating in the assault, they had no recourse but self-defense. Thomas checked the Winchester's action, while Sarah verified her escape route to evacuate Jason if the situation deteriorated beyond recovery. As the figures moved closer, converging on the house from multiple angles, a new sound interrupted the night, rushing water growing louder by the second. A tremendous crack echoed through the valley, followed by shouts of alarm from Reed's men. Thomas rushed to the window. The creek's ice dam broke, flash flood coming through. The surge hit moments later, a wall of water, ice, and debris sweeping down the valley with devastating force. Reed and his men scattered, running for higher ground as the torrent engulfed the lower property. Jim Tucker, positioned closest to the creek, vanished beneath the churning flow. Reed himself barely escaped, clinging to a tree as water rushed past. Within minutes, the immediate threat had transformed into a rescue operation. Deputy Jenkins was stranded on an island of high groundwater rising around him. Another man, Reed's attorney, clung to a partially submerged fence post, hypothermia already setting in as frigid water sapped his strength. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed rope from their supplies. "We have to help them." Thomas nodded grimly. "I'll take the deputy. You get Peterson." Reed can manage himself. The rescue required every skill Sarah had learned in military training: how to secure a line across moving water, how to approach a panicking victim, how to maintain her own safety while rendering aid. She reached Peterson just as his grip began to fail, securing him with the rope and dragging him through chest-deep water to safety. Thomas similarly extracted Jenkins from his predicament, the deputy's earlier complicity forgotten in the immediate crisis. They brought both men into the house, administering the same emergency care Sam Tucker had received hours earlier. Reed made his own way to shore further downstream. He stood watching from a distance as his co-conspirators received aid from those they'd come to destroy, his expression unreadable through the swirling snow. Then he turned and disappeared into the storm, abandoning his followers to the mercy of his enemies. By morning, the flood had receded, leaving a transformed landscape. The creek had carved a new channel closer to the house than before. Debris littered the valley floor, branches, fence posts, and the twisted remains of the Tucker brothers' truck lodged against a stand of pines. Jim Tucker's body was found at first light, half buried in silt 200 yards downstream. The discovery sobered Sam, confronting him with the consequences of their actions and his brother's choices. He sat alone on the porch for hours afterward, declining food or conversation. When he finally spoke, it was with the clarity of a man reassessing his life's direction. "I'll testify." His eyes met Sarah's directly for the first time. "About Reed's documents, the spring, everything." Jim made his choice. "I'm making mine." The snow began its slow surrender in early March, retreating from the south-facing slopes first, then gradually yielding ground across the valley floor. Mornings arrived with crystalline brilliance, sunlight transforming melting drifts into jeweled fields that sparkled until afternoon shadows swallowed their fire. The Harrison house shed its winter armor, one icicle at a time, revealing weathered bones that had endured yet another season of Colorado's harsh judgment. Sarah stood on the porch each dawn, tracking the changing landscape, noting how the creek, redirected by the flood, now curved closer to the house like a protective arm. The disaster that had nearly claimed lives had also reshaped the land in their favor, creating a natural barrier that would complicate any future approach from Reed's direction. Inside the house had undergone its own transformation. Rooms once abandoned to decay now served purpose again. The kitchen with its restored pump and mended cabinets, the dining room where they took meals at William's massive oak table bedrooms with patched walls and sealed windows. Even the study had evolved from mere shelter to functional space. William's desk now covered with maps and documents instead of dust and mouse droppings. Most significant was the change in Jason. The city child who'd arrived thin-shouldered and uncertain now moved through the house with proprietary confidence, knowing which floorboards creaked, which windows caught morning light, which door hinges needed regular oiling. Thomas had taught him practical skills that Dr. Von Parker had never bothered with: how to split kindling without losing fingers, how to read weather from cloud formations, how to measure twice before cutting once. Sam Tucker remained at the Harrison house through those transitional weeks, initially too injured to travel, then increasingly by choice. His frostbite had been severe enough to claim 2 toes, forcing him to relearn balance and gait. Sarah's medical care had saved his remaining extremities, creating a debt he seemed determined to repay through labor, chopping wood, repairing fences, teaching Jason to fish in the swollen creek. The younger Tucker brother occupied an uneasy position, neither fully guest nor completely family, yet bound to them by shared adversity and growing respect. His knowledge of the valley proved invaluable, particularly regarding the spring that had catalyzed their conflict with Reed. Under Sam's guidance, they located the water source Margaret Harrison had called Our Blessing, a natural spring emerging from limestone outcroppings half a mile behind the house, its flow constant despite surrounding snowmelt. The water bubbled up crystal clear between moss-covered stones, collecting in a natural basin before trickling away to join the creek below. Even in freezing temperatures, steam rose gently from its surface, evidence of geothermal properties that kept it several degrees warmer than ambient conditions. Sarah tested the water carefully, utilizing her medical training to analyze its properties. High mineral content, particularly magnesium and lithium, confirmed the findings in Williams' documents. Modern medicine recognized these elements for treating various conditions, exactly the therapeutic value Reed had intended to exploit commercially. Thomas continued his mail route through these weeks of thaw, bringing news from Mill Creek along with supplies. Reed had retreated to his offices, making no further direct moves against the property, but working through legal channels with renewed determination. County officials, shaken by Deputy Jenkins' near-death experience and subsequent confession about Reed's illegal activities, had begun distancing themselves from their former patron. Most significantly, Thomas reported that their evidence photographs of Williams' documents, the original deed tax records, contradicting Reed's claims, had been formally filed with Judge Martha Kingsley at the county courthouse. The judge, long suspicious of Reed's influence over her colleagues, had opened an investigation into the conflicting property records. These developments created breathing room. Legal proceedings would take months to resolve, especially with Sam Tucker's testimony adding criminal dimensions to what had begun as a civil property dispute. Spring would come and go before final determinations were made, granting Sarah and Jason time to strengthen their position both physically and legally. The road to town cleared in late March, allowing Sarah to finally keep her appointment at the Mill Creek Clinic. Dr. Howard Jennings, the aging physician who'd served the community for 4 decades, hired her on the spot after reviewing her military medical credentials and experience. His arthritis had progressed to the point where surgical assistance had become necessary, making Sarah's trauma experience particularly valuable. The nursing position provided modest but steady income, allowing Sarah to purchase materials for proper house repairs beyond their makeshift solutions. More importantly, working in town 3 days weekly connected her to the broader community, transforming her from suspicious outsider to contributing member with valuable skills. Jason accompanied her on these trips, initially attending the small local school, while Sarah worked her shifts. He approached the arrangement with characteristic adaptability, though his conversations increasingly centered around projects waiting at home and lessons Thomas had promised to teach him upon return. On a pale Tuesday morning in early April, as Sarah prepared for her clinic day, an unfamiliar vehicle struggled up the muddy road to the Harrison house, an ancient station wagon with Denver plates, its muffler announcing arrival long before visual confirmation. A young woman emerged from the driver's side, cradling a sleeping toddler against her shoulder. Even from a distance, Sarah noted the fading bruise beneath the woman's left eye, the nervous vigilance in her posture, the wedding ring conspicuously absent from her swollen finger. Sarah recognized the signs immediately, had seen them countless times in emergency rooms during her nursing career. The visitor startled when the front door opened, nearly retreating to her vehicle before desperation overcame fear. "Please," her voice trembling like aspen leaves in wind. "Thomas Harmon said you might." She glanced back toward the road as if expecting pursuit. "My boy hasn't eaten since yesterday." Without hesitation, Sarah stepped aside, motioning the woman in from the chill morning air. "Come inside, there's heat." The woman, Mary Wilson, 24, from Denver's western suburbs, had fled an escalating domestic violence situation with her 2-year-old son, Michael. Thomas had encountered her at a gas station in Mill Creek, recognized her circumstances from decades of law enforcement experience, and directed her to the Harrison house rather than the town's gossip-prone boarding house. Mary's story emerged in fragments between spoonfuls of oatmeal and whispered reassurances to her son. Marriage at 19 to Frank Wilson, a construction foreman whose charming courtship had transformed into controlling abuse after the wedding. Initially financial control, then isolation from friends and family, finally escalating to physical violence that had previously spared their son, but recently began including threats against the child. Sarah prepared the small bedroom upstairs for them, the one that had once belonged to a Harrison child, where Jason had found the carved wooden horse. Mary moved through the house with the hypervigilance of prey animals, startling at creaking boards and slamming doors. Michael, by contrast, displayed the resilience of toddlerhood, quickly adopting Jason as a fascinating new playmate who could build towers of blocks specifically for gleeful destruction. That evening, when Thomas arrived for his regular visit, Sarah briefed him on their new guests, while Jason entertained Michael in the parlor. Thomas nodded, unsurprised by the development he'd initiated. "Figured you'd take them in. House like this was meant for people needing shelter." His weathered face softened, watching the children play. "Had a feeling about this place from the moment I saw smoke rising from that chimney again." The expanding household created new dynamics, Mary taking over kitchen duties with unexpected talent, Michael's laughter bringing life to rooms long silent, Jason discovering the pride of being looked up to by a younger child. The Harrison house, so recently a fortress against external threats, gradually shifted toward its new identity as sanctuary. Sarah continued working at the clinic, her medical skills increasingly valued as spring accidents and illnesses filled examination rooms. Dr. Jennings, recognizing her capabilities, gradually entrusted her with greater responsibilities, including minor surgeries and diagnostic decisions. The arrangement benefited both. Sarah received income and professional respect, while the aging doctor gained relief from the physical demands of rural medicine. Mary remained at the house with Michael, her culinary skills transforming basic provisions into remarkable meals. She revealed a background in restaurant management before her marriage expertise now channeled into optimizing their limited resources. Under her care, the kitchen evolved from functional to welcoming the heart of the house as it must have been in Margaret Harrison's day. April brought heavy rains, revealing roof weaknesses they'd missed during winter repairs. Thomas and Sam spent 3 days replacing damaged sections with salvaged materials, Jason serving as enthusiastic apprentice. Sarah returned from clinic shifts to find progress each evening, another room secured against elements, another system restored to function, another piece of the house reclaiming its intended purpose. The property itself awakened from winter dormancy, grass greening in the valley, wildflowers emerging on south-facing slopes, aspens unfurling bright green leaves that shimmered in spring breezes. Jason and Thomas planted a small vegetable garden in the sheltered area behind the kitchen, the boy meticulously measuring rows and depths according to Thomas's instructions, proudly announcing himself the man of the house when Sarah complimented their work. In this atmosphere of cautious renewal, the legal proceedings regarding the Harrison property continued in Mill Creek's courthouse. Judge Kingsley, proceeding methodically, despite pressure from Reed's attorneys, ordered comprehensive review of all documentation. The investigation expanded beyond property records to include allegations of witness intimidation, official misconduct, and document falsification. Sam Tucker's testimony proved pivotal, his insider knowledge of Reed's operations providing context for previously disconnected evidence. His cooperation earned leniency regarding his own involvement, though his brother's death during the flood attempt weighed heavily on proceedings, a stark reminder of consequences already paid. The case attracted attention beyond Mill Creek, with Denver newspapers running occasional updates on the David versus Goliath property dispute. Reed's business associates, sensing potential legal exposure, began quietly distancing themselves from ventures connected to the Harrison Spring development. In late April, as dogwood blossoms whitened the hillsides, a new visitor arrived at the Harrison house, a silver Lincoln, navigating the muddy road with determined dignity. The elderly woman who emerged moved with the deliberate care of someone managing arthritis, but refused Thomas's offered assistance, insisting on climbing the porch steps under her own power. Elegantly dressed, despite practical concessions to rural conditions, she surveyed the house with unmistakable familiarity before introducing herself. Emily Harrison Blackwell. William Harrison was my grandfather. The name electrified the household. Sarah invited her inside with a mixture of hospitality and wariness, uncertain whether this Harrison heir represented ally or complication. Emily moved through the room slowly, fingers trailing over surfaces, pausing at certain features with visible emotion. In the study, she stopped before William's desk, now cleared of Sarah's papers and restored to something approaching its original condition. I was born in this house. Emily's voice soft with memory. Upstairs in the room with the eastern window. Grandfather would carry me to watch sunrise over the valley. She turned to Sarah, eyes bright with unshed tears. I never thought I'd feel its warmth again. Over tea served in Margaret's china cups, carefully washed and restored by Mary Emily, explained her presence. She'd been living in Boston for decades, managing family investments after a career in education. News of the legal battle had reached her through a clipping service that monitored mentions of family names. I couldn't believe it when I read that someone had restored the Harrison house. After grandfather died, my father tried to maintain it from Denver, but distance and demands of his law practice made it impossible. Eventually, the property taxes became burdensome, without income from the cattle operation. Sarah explained their circumstances: the broken wagon, the winter sanctuary, the discovered documents, Reed's claims and tactics. Emily listened intently, occasionally nodding as pieces connected in her understanding. Reed approached my father about purchasing the property in the 70s, Emily revealed. Father refused, believing the spring should remain undeveloped, as grandfather wished. After father's death, Reed tried again with me, offering substantial sums. I declined, but they lost track of the property's status after moving east. I assumed taxes were being paid through the family trust. She examined the documents Sarah had discovered, confirming their authenticity and providing context for gaps in their understanding. The spring had indeed healed Margaret Harrison of tuberculosis when Denver doctors had given up hope. William's protection of the water source stemmed from this personal miracle and his promise to keep it accessible rather than exploited. Before departing, Emily pressed a folded document into Sarah's hands, yellowed but legally valid. This is the most recent deed to the Harrison property, transferred to my name after father's passing. The family trust has continued paying taxes, though apparently county records were altered to hide this fact. Her eyes met Sarah's directly. It belongs to you now if you'll have it. Homes belong to those who keep them alive. Sarah tried to object, the generosity overwhelming, but Emily raised a hand to silence protest. I have no children, no heirs interested in Colorado property. What you've done here, protecting the house, discovering the truth, honoring my grandparents' wishes for the spring, means more than legal ownership ever could. The formal transfer would require proper filing, but Emily's endorsement transformed their legal position overnight. From squatters defending against eviction, they became legitimate successors to Harrison ownership, with documentation proving continuous, family title unchallenged by Reed's manufactured claims. News of Emily Harrison's appearance spread through Mill Creek with small-town efficiency. Judge Kingsley expedited review of the updated evidence, issuing preliminary findings that heavily favored the Harrison deed's validity over Reed's contested documents. The investigation into record tampering accelerated, with county officials suddenly eager to demonstrate cooperation rather than complicity. Reed himself maintained public silence, though reports filtered back of closed-door meetings with attorneys and late-night departures from his offices. His business operations continued, but investment partners began withdrawing from joint ventures, sensing changing winds in the valley's power structure. May arrived with explosive greening meadows, lush with new growth forests, thickened with understory plants emerging from dormancy, the revitalized creek cutting deeper channels through softened earth. The Harrison house matched this renewal, its exterior now patched and partially repainted, windows reglazed and gleaming porch railings restored to functional beauty. Inside rooms that had been merely habitable now approached comfortable. Salvaged furniture supplemented with modest purchases created living spaces that honored the home's Victorian bones while serving modern needs. Sarah's nursing salary combined with Mary's careful budgeting stretched resources effectively, while Thomas and Sam contributed labor and materials from their own supplies. The household had settled into functional routine, Sarah working her clinic shifts, Mary managing domestic operations, Thomas visiting regularly though maintaining his separate cabin residence. Sam had largely recovered from his injuries, dividing time between the Harrison place and temporary construction work in Mill Creek. Jason flourished in this arrangement, absorbing knowledge from each adult while developing confidence as Michael's protector and role model. On a Sunday morning in mid-May, as sunlight streamed through freshly washed windows, a truck unfamiliar to the household labored up the road newer than Thomas's vehicle, but showing hard use. Mary spotted at first, her instinctive tension indicating recognition before she could form words. Frank Wilson emerged from the driver's side, his powerful construction worker frame incongruous with his hesitant approach to the house. He stopped at the gate, not trespassing beyond the property line, and removed his hat, a gesture of respect or uncertainty. "Mary, they said in town I might find you here." The household mobilized with practiced efficiency, Sarah positioning herself on the perch between Frank and the door, Thomas moving to flank rather than confront Sam, appearing from the barn with purposeful stride. Mary remained inside with Michael and Jason, though her pale face watched through the window. Frank recognized the protective formation, raising his hands to indicate peaceful intentions. "I'm not here to make trouble. Just want to talk to my wife. See my boy." His voice carried neither threat nor demand, just weariness and something approaching humility. Sarah maintained her position, assessing the man with medical precision, clear eyes indicating sobriety stance, suggesting tension, but not aggression, facial expressions appropriate to the circumstances. "That's Mary's decision to make, not yours, not ours." Minutes stretched into a standoff, broken finally by Mary herself, who emerged onto the porch with squared shoulders and lifted chin, physical courage, masking emotional turmoil. "Say what you came to say, Frank." "Michael's sleeping." Their conversation occurred beyond hearing of the others, conducted at the garden fence with careful distance maintained between them. Frank spoke more than Mary, his gestures occasionally emphatic but never threatening. Mary's responses came sparingly, arms crossed in self-protection rather than defiance. When she returned to the porch, her expression revealed little. "He's been in a program. Anger management. Counseling." Her voice carried neither hope nor cynicism, just flat acknowledgement. "Wants another chance." Sarah recognized the perilous moment. The cycle of abuse typically included reconciliation phases, promises made and temporarily kept, before inevitable escalation resumed. "What do you want, Mary?" "Not what he wants. Not what's easiest. What do you want?" The younger woman looked back toward the house that had sheltered her, then to the man waiting by his truck. "Time. Space to think without pressure." Her decision crystallized visibly. "He can visit Michael here where it's safe for everyone. Beyond that, I need time." Frank accepted these terms without protest, scheduling supervised visits that would occur on the Harrison property with others present. The arrangement satisfied no one completely, but protected everyone's essential interests. Michael's relationship with his father, Mary's security and autonomy, Frank's opportunity to demonstrate genuine change if it existed. The first such visit occurred the following weekend, tense but ultimately productive. Frank brought a handmade wooden train for Michael, crafted during his therapy sessions. He maintained appropriate boundaries, directed his communication to his son rather than pressuring Mary, and departed at the agreed time without resistance. Most telling was his response when Thomas casually mentioned ongoing repairs to the barn roof. Without prompting, Frank offered his professional skills for the project, volunteering labor without expectation of special treatment regarding Mary. "Least I can do for the people who've been taking care of my family." The offer, tentatively accepted, established a new dimension of the household dynamic. Frank began contributing weekend work to property improvements. his construction expertise accelerating projects that had challenged their amateur capabilities. He slept in town at the boarding house, maintaining the separation Mary required while demonstrating consistency through actions rather than promises. Sarah observed these developments with cautious optimism. As both medical professional and abuse survivor advocate, she recognized genuine recovery efforts without naivete about relapse possibilities. The structured environment allowed Mary to evaluate Frank's progress without isolation or pressure, making decisions from position of strength rather than vulnerability. Through these complexities of human reconciliation, the natural world continued its own renewal cycles. The spring that had catalyzed their conflict with Reed revealed new dimensions as surrounding snow fully retreated. The outflow formed a series of terraced pools before joining the creek, each basin lined with distinctive mineral deposits that created striking blue-green coloration against surrounding vegetation. Following William Harrison's maps, they located the original stone-lined bathing pool he had constructed for Margaret's treatments. Decades of sediment had filled it, but the craftsmanship remained evident. Flat stones carefully fitted to create comfortable seating within the flow, a natural therapy spa utilizing the water's properties without disrupting its course. Sarah Thomas and Sam worked together to restore this feature, carefully removing accumulated debris while preserving the original design. Jason participated, eagerly fascinated by the water's unusual properties and the history behind its protection. The project connected them directly to William and Margaret's intentions, therapeutic use balanced with conservation benefit without exploitation. As May yielded to June's longer days and strengthening heat, the legal proceedings regarding Reed's activities reached critical mass. County investigators, initially focused solely on property records, had expanded their inquiry to examine decades of Reed's business operations. Patterns emerged: strategic manipulation of regulations, selective enforcement against competitors, consistent advantage derived from insider information about public projects. Judge Kingsley, navigating complex political currents while maintaining judicial independence, authorized formal charges against county officials who had facilitated Reed's document alterations. Deputy Jenkins, seeking leniency, provided testimony detailing Reed's systematic corruption of local government functions. The investigation expanded beyond Mill Creek to state-level authorities, bringing scrutiny Reed had successfully avoided for decades. Through these developments, Reed himself maintained public composure, attending church services, operating his businesses, participating in community functions as if untouched by gathering storms. Yet observant residents noted subtle changes. Security personnel accompanying him where he previously walked alone, longtime associates suddenly unavailable for meetings, liquidity issues arising in previously stable ventures. The brewing confrontation crystallized on a Wednesday evening in late June. Sarah, returning from her clinic shift, found Thomas's truck and 3 unfamiliar vehicles parked near the Harrison house. Inside, she discovered the household in silent tension. Reed himself seated at the dining room table, flanked by his attorney and a woman in business attire Sarah didn't recognize. Across from them sat Thomas, Sam, and Judge Kingsley herself, the latter's presence indicating official capacity rather than social visit. Mary had taken the children upstairs, removing them from what was clearly a high-stakes negotiation. Reed rose when Sarah entered, his perfect veneer showing hairline cracks of strain. "Mrs. Parker, we were just discussing a proposed resolution to our unfortunate property disagreement." His smile remained practiced but failed to reach his eyes. "My representatives have prepared a generous offer." The attorney slid documents across the table, legal language disguising simple reality. Reed proposed purchasing the Harrison property for $3 million, contingent upon immediate transfer of all water rights and withdrawal of evidence from ongoing investigations. Judge Kingsley watched impassively her presence, ensuring procedural propriety while preventing intimidation tactics Reed might otherwise employ. Thomas's expression remained carefully neutral, respecting Sarah's authority to make this decision, despite his evident opinion. Sarah reviewed the documents without sitting, maintaining height advantage while processing implications. The amount was substantial financial security for Jason's education, Mary's fresh start, their collective future. Yet the terms required abandoning both William Harrison's explicit wishes and the accountability Reed had evaded for decades. Reed misinterpreted her hesitation as negotiation strategy. "The offer expires tonight, Mrs. Parker. My investors cannot tolerate further uncertainty. $5 million, but not a penny more, and only with complete confidentiality, regarding all matters discussed in depositions. Sarah placed the documents back on the table, decision crystallized by Reed's assumption that everything and everyone had a price. This property isn't for sale, Mr. Reed, not for $5 million or $50 million. She met his gaze, directly military bearing, evident in her posture. Some things can't be bought. William Harrison understood that. Now we do too. Reed's composed exterior cracked further, a calculation giving way to raw frustration. You're making a grave mistake. This investigation will be buried. My associates in Denver won't allow their interest to be damaged by small-town politics. His voice lowered, threat evident despite careful wording. People who stand against progress tend to lose everything. Accidents happen, records disappear, witnesses reconsider. Judge Kingsley rose immediately, ending any pretense of neutral observation. That statement will be entered into record, Mr. Reed, as witness intimidation. Her authoritative tone silenced Reed's attorney before objection formed. State authorities have assumed jurisdiction over this investigation as of this morning. Your influence with local officials is now irrelevant. The businesswoman, revealed as a state attorney general's representative, added final confirmation. Mr. Reed's financial activities have attracted federal attention as well. Treasury Department investigators will arrive tomorrow to examine certain transactions flagged by banking regulations. Reed's face drained of color as he recognized the coordinated legal trap he'd walked into. His own attempt at resolution had instead documented additional criminal behavior before official witnesses. The carefully constructed power structure he'd maintained for decades was collapsing under formal scrutiny he couldn't control. He departed without further threats, his attorney frantically whispering advice ignored by a man watching his empire crumble. The vehicles retreated down the valley road, disappearing around the bend that had witnessed so many arrivals and departures during the Harrison house's long history. Judge Kingsley remained, briefly confirming what Sarah had suspected: the meeting had been orchestrated specifically to document Reed's response to rejection. His behavior had followed predicted patterns, providing evidence that would strengthen already substantial cases against him. In the days that followed, Reed's public persona disintegrated rapidly. News reports detailed federal seizure of business records, suspension of banking privileges, pending investigation, resignation of board members from his various enterprises. The man who had dominated the valley through fear and financial leverage found himself isolated. His resources frozen, his influence evaporated. Most damaging was the community's response. Shopkeepers suddenly finding courage to discuss decades of extortionate rent increases. Contractors revealing systematic bid rigging. Ordinary citizens sharing stories of threats and intimidation previously kept private from fear of retaliation. The narrative of Victor Reed transformed overnight from respected businessman to corrupt manipulator. Property owners whose land had been acquired through questionable means filed legal actions to recover losses. Development partners withdrew from projects, triggering contract penalties Reed could no longer afford, with assets frozen pending investigation. In this atmosphere of long-delayed accountability, the Harrison house received formal recognition of its historical significance. Emily Harrison's attorney filed documentation establishing a conservation trust, protecting both the property and the spring in perpetuity. The terms honored William and Margaret's original intentions: preservation of natural resources, community access to therapeutic waters, prohibition against commercial exploitation. Sarah became legal steward of this trust, responsible for maintaining the property according to established guidelines while adapting its use to serve current community needs. The arrangement provided security without commercial pressure, ensuring the house and spring would remain protected regardless of future ownership changes. As summer progressed toward autumn, the Harrison household continued its evolution from emergency shelter to intentional community. The barn, fully restored through Frank Wilson's professional assistance, became workshop space where Thomas taught traditional woodworking skills to local youth, including Jason, who displayed natural aptitude for craftsmanship. Mary established a small bakery operation in the expanded kitchen, supplying bread to Mill Creek businesses while testing her readiness to resume professional independence. Her relationship with Frank progressed cautiously through consistent counseling, his continued sobriety, and anger management creating foundation for potential reconciliation without rushing vulnerable trust. Sam Tucker found unexpected purpose managing the spring property, applying his local knowledge to conservation practices while learning water management principles from university extension courses. The younger Tucker brother, once defined by his relationship to Reed's operations, discovered personal identity through stewardship rather than exploitation. Sarah's role at the clinic expanded beyond nursing to partnership. Dr. Jennings, acknowledging his advancing age and diminished capabilities, offered transition toward eventual practice transfer. The arrangement utilized her medical skills fully while allowing flexible scheduling around property management responsibilities. The therapeutic spring, restored to William Harrison's original vision, began serving community needs through controlled access. Local physicians referred patients with conditions responsive to mineral treatments. Veterans with chronic pain found relief in the naturally heated pools. Children with certain skin conditions improved through regulated bathing protocols Sarah developed using her medical training. Thomas remained central to these developments while maintaining his characteristic independence. His mail route continued, providing connection between town and outlying areas, though his cabin sat empty more nights than not as he gradually shifted personal belongings to the room adjoining Sarah's. Their relationship had evolved naturally without formal declarations or dramatic moments. Shared purpose had created foundation for deeper connection. Practical partnership, blossoming into companionship, neither had expected to find at their respective stages of life. The age difference that initially concerned Thomas proved irrelevant against their complementary strengths and mutual respect. 18 months after Sarah and Jason's desperate arrival during that winter storm, the property hosted its first official gathering, a harvest celebration commemorating the Harrison house's formal dedication as community landmark. Tables spread across the front lawn accommodated nearly 100 guests, including Emily Harrison, who had traveled from Boston to participate. Judge Kingsley attended with her husband, their presence representing the legal victory that had preserved the property. Dr. Jennings brought clinic staff. Shopkeepers from Mill Creek mingled with ranchers from surrounding valleys. Even Sam's mother came, tentatively reconnecting with her surviving son after months of grief-driven distance following Jim's death. Reed himself was conspicuously absent, having left Colorado after accepting a plea agreement that protected him from imprisonment but stripped him of assets connected to illegal activities. The Valley's longtime power broker had departed with a fraction of his former wealth, his influence reduced to cautionary tales about corruption's inevitable consequences. As evening approached, Thomas tapped a glass for attention, the gathering quieting to hear his uncharacteristically public address. William Harrison built this house for love, love of his wife, love of this land, love of what people could be at their best. His weathered face softened as he surveyed the community assembled on property that had stood abandoned just 2 seasons earlier. The cold house is cold no more. Sarah watched this man who had transformed from mail carrier to partner, remembering his first appearance during their desperate beginning, silver beard rimmed with frost, steady eyes evaluating whether they belonged in a place they'd claimed through necessity rather than right. Jason moved among guests with newfound confidence, explaining property features to visitors with proprietary pride. Mary supervised food service while keeping watchful eye on Michael and Frank, who worked together serving cider with cautious harmony, suggesting healing neither had thought possible months earlier. Sam directed parking and accessibility accommodations, his limp from lost toes now merely part of his movement rather than defining characteristic. As twilight deepened toward true darkness, Emily Harrison joined Sarah on the porch, both women watching celebration continue by lantern light. "My grandfather would approve," Emily's voice soft with satisfaction. "Not just the preservation, but the purpose. He believed deeply that wealth existed to create possibility, not power." Sarah considered the unusual path that had brought them to this moment, a broken wagon, a desperate winter, a house abandoned but not forgotten. "We found more than shelter here," her response acknowledging deeper truths than property ownership. "We found what we were meant to protect." Night settled fully over the Harrison house, stars emerging in familiar patterns above the valley. William and Margaret had claimed generations earlier. Inside, lamps glowed in windows that had stood dark for decades. Outside, voices blended with night sounds, conversation and laughter mixing with cricket song and distant owl calls. The house listened, patient and alive as it had through years of abandonment. Not waiting for rescue, but for purpose, for people who would remember its original promise and carry that intention forward. The warm house stood on its hill, not as monument to past glory, but as beacon of continuing possibility. Its doors never locked, its chimney never cold, its heart beating in rhythm with those who had found home within its sheltering walls.